I'm currently the game director at a startup called Hidden Door, where we're using machine learning to build co-creative story experiences with people online, and it's cool and weird and a little scary, and I'm psyched about it. Before then, I worked at Firehose and Harmonix and Turbine, and way long ago, a company called Impressions that was part of a company called CR Online. I've been doing this for about almost exactly 30 years. That's me. Oh, and I'm making a game with my son called Loose Nozzles, the game, not the sun, which is going to come out in August. A little indie arcade game.
Emma, you want to give us a little intro?
Yeah, sure thing. So my name is 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀. I am a 3D character artist for Hackjack Studios. We're working on Pigeon Sim. We're a little indie game studio uh, under 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀. Um, I've only been in the industry for a year. I'm actually coming up on my 1 year mark at Hackjack. I graduated WPI in 2021. Um, Before this, I was just doing some, like 3D contract work and stuff like that. So I'm the newbie here. I'm the Padawan amongst the industry veterans. But it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Emma.
Thank you. So glad to have you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Cole. I'm a UI artist at Demurge Studios right now. I was most recently the UI lead on a game called 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 and now we're working on a secret project that I can't talk about, unfortunately. Um, Before that, I was working on Rock Band 4 at Harmonix for a while. I've been in games for about 5 years now. I graduated Mass Art in 2017 with a BFA in illustration, so I had a bit of an interesting path into games. But yeah, I do a lot of 2D work, incorporate traditional work sometimes, and UI UX stuff. So that's me.
Thank you, Cole.
Rad. Yeah.
And
Oh,
and to that end, about interesting ways of entering into the games industry, like obviously we're super excited to hear from these three awesome game devs and, figuring out like how they sort of planned their journeys into the industry, how they found themselves here, what sort of connections they made, and every answer they give is probably going to be different from the one before. So, without further ado, let's hop into our first question, which is, what were you doing for work or in life before you decided that you wanted to get a job in the games industry? And we could go in the same order that we introduced ourselves in if you'd like, or if anyone wants to just pop in with their answer, that's acceptable as well.
I'll go first. I'll fill in the awkward silence. I was in college studying film, and I was a fan of video games and an avid player, and I dabbled with them as a kid, but was not planning to go into games. I was planning on going into screenwriting. So that's where I started from.
I can jump in next here. I was a barista for about a million years. I was in food service for like 10 years, I think. And I was still working on that just out of college, as is the fate of many an art school kid. Um, and I was also teaching kids art classes at the Coolidge Corner School. And I also had an affinity for games, but wasn't necessarily sure that that was what was going to happen for me. I was actually studying to become a tattoo apprentice for a while and got recruited out of mass art for that before I made the pivot into games.
So I was mostly in college doing school things. But I didn't really know where I was going for a while. I kind of realized that I really enjoyed 3D sculpting and modeling and stuff probably like late junior year, and then like went went all in on it my senior year. And so that's when I knew that I really wanted to be a 3D artist. Um, Before then, I was kind of like, oh, well, what if I want to be a biology teacher? Like senior year of high school, like I really was kind of like figuring out my interests and stuff. So, but yeah.
neat. Yeah, rad. All different walks of life. Kind of relatedly, did y'all have any game development experience before your first game dev job?
I had programmed as a kid in middle school, and this was made me relatively weird for the time. It was basic on Atari 8-bit computers. Um, so I had noodled with the idea of making games, um, but it was purely sort of just personal exploration, and then it got too hard and I stopped. But that's what was sort of a little bit of context.
Super relatable with the it got too hard and I stopped. I basically had no actual games industry experience before getting in there. I think also in middle school I did like a make a game kind of boot camp thing in the summer, and like this is gonna be embarrassing, but I was very obsessed with the Warrior Cats book series as a child. So me and my friends decided we were gonna make a cat game
Awesome.
when I was a kid.
Very good.
That did not actually come to fruition. So the answer is basically no.
You know, you mentioning the cat game reminded me. I think my first game dev experience was probably trying to make a like a card game, like a tradable card game type thing based on like City of Heroes, which was an old MMORPG with my
Oh, yeah.
friend in like fourth grade, and it went really bad. But I doodled some cards and made up some really broken like mechanics, and we just passed cards back and forth. But yeah, other than that, I didn't do a whole lot until I figured out that I did want to get into game dev. Like I was always doing art and artistic projects and stuff. Not a whole lot of 3D modeling before school. I got a chance to do the Mass Digi SIP program with the really wonderful people over at Mass Digi. So that was like a really great game dev experience for me, and just game jams with friends and stuff like that. So that's kind of what I had before trying out the industry, trying to get into the industry.
Well, thank you for sharing, everybody.
Yeah.
Yeah, moving on. Was there anything in particular, like an event or a reason that you decided to get a job in the games industry?
I wanted money. Um, it was well, I was graduated college. I was graduating and was looking at a job, and I needed to be and stay in the area because my then girlfriend was still in school for a couple more years. So I was literally staring down a newspaper of want ads. Uh, Newspapers being this thing that was a piece of paper with news in it, and in the job listings there was an actual, like, I was just looking for something that I could stomach, and I'm posting into the general channel, like, I actually found the one ad that I answered back then. So it was dumb luck is the short answer. um, but yeah, it was just I needed a job and was fortunate enough to find an opportunity at the time. So it's not good career planning. I don't recommend it to anyone else.
Yeah, I had a baseline love of video games for a long time. It was a thing me and my best friend used to do and play all the time when we were younger. And we would bond over, Mass Effect, Fallout. I had like a surgery in middle school, and I think I played Fallout 3 for like 12 hours a day for a long time. Um, and I already knew I loved games, but it didn't come to fruition until I started to realize that my tattoo apprenticeship was not going to work out because I have a connective tissue disorder, and I realized that like my body was not going to be able to like handle how intense that work would be. And the environment wasn't the greatest, and the money wasn't the greatest, and I was like, I might need a plan B here. And plan B turned into the much better plan, I have to say.
For me, I loved games for a long time. Like spent a lot of my time with friends hanging out and playing games online or in person, and I knew that I wanted to do something uh either in science or in art, and then realized, okay, I definitely want to do something in art. Like this is definitely what's gonna make me the happiest. Um, I actually didn't know that I was gonna do games until like I was applying to schools, And I was like, well, I've never made a game before, but I'm gonna just take a chance here and get into a game dev program. And it ended up being a pretty like great. It was a good choice for me. I loved it as soon as I started doing it, and so that's when I knew like I definitely wanted to pursue a career in it.
Rad. Yeah, thanks y'all for sharing. Uh, so kind of related, how long was the gap between when you decided that you wanted to get into the games industry, and when you actually broke into the industry?
For me, it was actually a pretty short period of time, maybe about a year. I I was just out of Mass Art. We had a big career fair. I remember Harmonix being there. I was, pretty busy talking to the tattoo people, but I was like, oh, why don't I drop off my little packet of art because Mass Art did not understand the concept of like Instagram and non-physical media. So I dropped them off a little packet of my work, and then about, I want to say 6 to 8 months later, someone from Harmonix reached out to me to do some contract work for a game they were making, and that was kind of the start of, foot in the door, like leading to some other things at Harmonix. So it was about a year for me. I think I graduated in 2017 and started the contract work in late 2017, and then I was full time at Harmonix for a while in 2018.
And I can selfishly say that I really loved the time that Cole was full time at Harmonix because we grew closer together as friends during that period of time.
Yes, I was very enamored by Alyssa's extremely cool job, and I was like, wow, I want an extremely cool job like that.
It's super heartwarming when you can make lifelong friends while working together in the industry. Those are things that you truly never forget.
I think for me it was kind of like a rolling situation, right? Like I was in college and I knew that I wanted to get into the industry, and I was kind of like grasping at whatever like contract work I could get, kind of like junior, senior year, mostly senior year probably. Um, so just kind of like I was working with, Broken Archer, and working on their cast of characters, like while also still kind of being in school and like doing that stuff. So it was kind of like a weird, like, I don't know, it's continuous thing for me that I was still learning and still figuring out what I wanted to do while kind of doing little contract things here and there. Um, and then it took me like probably 6 months or so, after graduating to find my place with Hackjack.
For me, again, because a lot of dumb luck was involved, it took about a month from looking through the want ads and applying and getting this job, which was just a customer service representative inside a games company that was hiring. They were going to hire one person to join the president of the company who was opening up a US branch, and ended up hiring two of us. And I believe they told us by splitting the salary in half, which was really awesome. And that got me in the door. And I would say maybe it took me a year and a half or 2 years to wander into what became my niche, which was sort of design.
Thank you, everybody. Now on to a spicier question, and I'm interested to hear how everyone's paths sort of diverge here. But what was the most challenging part of breaking into the game industry for you all individually?
Throwing applications out everywhere. I sent so many applications to so many jobs. Just and you hear back from like a fraction of those um, like applications. So that was probably difficult. Also, finding listings was kind of tough. Like, there's, I mean, there's some really awesome platforms out there, but to really like sift through and kind of narrow down things that fit into your skill set and things that you think you're ready for or want to reach for and stuff like that can be tough. So probably the application process and finding the right fit.
Yeah, I agree with finding the right fit being like a very challenging part of it. I think the hardest part for me was like trying to figure out how skill set, which was mostly in a traditional like media art background, could be applied in games, and what avenues even existed to kind of like go down in that regard. Like I didn't really know a whole lot about UI UX at the time. I didn't really know much other than, oh, I kind of want to be a 2D artist here. But understanding that there were like different career paths within like that realm was something that is really difficult to learn until you're actually in the industry, which is kind of the paradox, right? Because you have to get in first to learn it. So there's that kind of like bumpy road at the beginning. Felt a bit lost trying to understand what I could fit into in the industry.
I think for me, sort of similarly, it was once I was in figuring out what I was good at, what I was comfortable at, what I could do. I was really lucky that I was at a company that was sort of a satellite of another studio. And it started with just three of us, and then it became five, and then it became 10, and then it became 25. And through that early part of that curve, I was able to try any number of jobs because everything needed to be done, and there were only two of us to do it with the president. And so, sort of sampling all of that, seeing what I was good at, seeing what I was a lot less good at or less comfortable doing was the biggest challenge. And I think also as someone who had undiagnosed anxiety issues at the time, also figuring out just what I internally was capable of doing or where I had challenges, which is something that I'd somehow sort of muddled through in college. But in a workplace, you're not paying for the privilege to be there, they're paying you to get stuff done. So like those issues become a different type of thing to cope with and learn about. So I think probably the toughest part was really just learning what I could do and where I needed to grow.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Really interesting to hear how much has changed, but also how much has stayed the same. I think now would be a good time to tap into our first audience question from Ro Morris. Ro Morris, you want to ask your question?
So, one thing I've noticed looking for jobs over the course of the summer was that a lot of uh, a lot of job roles basically have the you basically have to like have experience in order to get like one of the qualities that they're looking for is that you have experience. Um, how would you? I guess what I'm asking is, what kind of job would be like the perfect way of um, like the best um, entering job, I guess. Like, how do you get experience before properly entering the industry?
I'm going to defer on answering that because I suspect Cole and you have much more immediate experience with the state of things these days.
Yeah, I could speak to that a bit. I think the answer is twofold. Like one, now that I'm someone who like hires people, I kind of know now that when we're looking for quote unquote experience in an entry level role, that's like pretty fungible. Like it's not the first thing I look for, and if one of the candidates doesn't have experience because they are right out of college or they only have academic experience, like it's not a deal breaker at all for me. And I know that varies company by company. I think that something that helped me a lot was getting into a kind of like intermediate like program at Harmonix where it was for people who are just out of college, recent grads, and it was kind of like a 3 month program to gain a little experience and learn at the same time and kind of give you that stepping stone uh, to have something on your resume. So I think if you can find sometimes like college job boards will post that kind of stuff, or just networking with other people who are, new to the industry, I think could be really helpful.
Yeah, kind of to second that, like, yeah, I found, just for myself and with peers and even while at the studio, it seems like experience is really important, but it doesn't always like need to be like some sort of official in industry job. Like any sort of experience is really valuable. Whether it's like um, projects that you're doing on your own time, just anything that you're presenting online and kind of showing the work you put in and what you've learned and just showing off your skills and your efforts and stuff like that. Whether it's like a game jam or a like academic thing. It's just, yeah, experience is important, but it can be like, if you haven't had that job experience yet, it can be any kind of development experience.
All
Yeah,
right.
I would. I think I will. I think I'd second. I'll come around the back and second all of that. And so when I've hired people, a lot of it was before educational programs came in as strongly, but it was definitely looking at portfolios, not necessarily because that meant someone had professional experience, but that they had gone through the process. They had probably developed their ability to think about things, and it was an opportunity to talk to them to get a deeper understanding of how, in our case, they would think about design. One person I hired at Turbine, who's still there in their current form as Standing Stone Games, they were hired. We were looking for a junior content designer, and they were someone who had made all they'd done. They were actually, I think, in law. They had some sort of legal job, but at nights they made adventures in RPG Maker, and they made enough of them that they had a following in that community. So they had a portfolio, which was like, look at my games. Also, look up the reviews of my games from the people who play them. And it meant everything to us that they had actually written interactive stories that people had engaged with. It didn't matter that they weren't for sale. It mattered that they had gone through the process of learning how to make things for people. So yeah, I think any sort of experience you can get and talk to and explain and show your work goes a long way in just about any discipline.
Thank you for all that insight, everybody. Now, if you could think back to your first game dev job, doesn't necessarily have to be full time, could be contract, could be anything related to your first game dev project as a job. Um, what was it? If you guys could explain, describe what the projects were that you worked on for the first time.
I worked helping to run an office. It was like a 3-person office in a place in Farmington, Connecticut. So involved helping getting, stationery for the thing and stuff. And also helping to promote these games that were produced in England to American audiences, so helping to write press releases and things like that. And I was helping to localize games from English to American. So looking at them, looking at just giving feedback on manuals, on language. It was like just a hodgepodge of stuff to make games happen in the US. And so I can't even really tell you which one I did first because I ended up doing about 5 of them at the same time within the first month.
My first like job that wasn't like the quick contract that I talked about before was the 3-month Harmonix job that I had like second year out of college, and I think they called me a 2D art associate, which meant that I did a ton of random stuff. I made icons. The coolest thing I got to do, I mean, everything was cool, but the coolest thing I got to do was work on Rock Band 4, and I got to make some of the track skins that kind of, the ones that like roll down the screen when you're actually playing in Rock Band. And I got to design this like set of, I think it was 12 Zodiac themed track skins that had like layers, like channel layers and like layers of like mist and fog and parallaxing elements. And it was just like, it was like a dream for me. Like it was the coolest thing ever. B, it taught me a lot about, how to actually put things in the engine and like what that process was like, and the rest of the pipeline. So yeah, that was my first job.
I think my first job was technically SIP with MassDigi, which was like a full summer program, just working 9 to 5 on a mobile game with a team. Yeah, I think I did that and then did the Broken Archer contract stuff afterwards. But yeah, that was a really, really great experience. It definitely introduced me to like how game development itself like worked, like day to day. So that was cool. That was cool as a first job.
Rad. And once you actually, got those respective jobs, what was the most surprising thing, that you learned when you first got there?
Lots of like discussion and planning and meetings and like sharing ideas, especially like across the artist programmer like boundary. Like we had our little stand up every day. We had our Kanban board. We had like, and I had no idea that it was like that everything was structured in like such this way, like with the Kanban board and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is really cool. Like I know what everybody's working on. That's awesome. So I think that surprised me the most um, when I started working with Mastigi.
I think for me, the most surprising thing once I finally, started working in the office, which was very intimidating and exciting for me, was that it wasn't like this impenetrable wall anymore of like people who just like know exactly what they're doing all the time and like have super specialized roles. And like I was scared I was going to be left in the dust, but it was really way more collaborative than I thought it was going to be. And there was a lot of space for learning from people and just taking, a couple hours to learn something new from a coworker. Um, and it was just like more supportive of an environment than I think I was expecting. So I was pleasantly surprised to learn that. And I know that doesn't happen at every company, but I feel like that's been pretty consistent across my game dev experience so far.
I learned that if you wanted to make a game, you actually called someone in a factory warehouse in Florida and they would print boxes for you and print discs and print manuals and put them all in a thing and ship them to you. And you got to approve that the pages were in the right order and the labels were pointed the right way and everything was printed properly. Just a weird insight into how every layer of the sausage being made, coming into this with fewer expectations and not even a particular domain of game development to come into, just seeing things stripped down to, yeah, some dude in Florida is gonna like, set the dimensions of the thing that chops the cover of the manual to the right thing or not, and you're gonna have to deal with it. It was all those little particulate moments were surprising and interesting.
Thank you, guys. So this next question is probably geared more towards Cole and Chris, but um, since you two have had multiple jobs in the games industry now, how did getting subsequent jobs compare to getting that first one? How is that experience different, and maybe how is it the same?
Well, I can talk about that a bit. I think for me, the first Harmonix job I got was so like dreamy and perfect in a lot of ways that the second, getting a subsequent job after that was fairly terrifying and like a scary experience for a while because I had only actually been at Harmonix for I think 3 months and they didn't have the capacity to hire full time at that time. And I was like, I had been kind of hoping that that would happen. But with game dev, nothing is set in stone and things change fast a lot of the time. So I was kind of unprepared to like re-enter, looking for jobs because I felt it was so fortuitous the last job that I had found through networking. And I had this really awful series of interviews at a local indie studio where I just was like way in over my head. I had no idea what I was talking about. And they took me more seriously than they probably should have because I had worked at Harmonix before. And I got like I think into like the third or fourth round of interviews, and they were just like grilling me on questions that I had no idea how to answer because I wasn't actually a UI artist and I was going, into this UI role. So after many months of that fell through, obviously. and I felt like super out of my depth, really unsure how to get another full-time game job. Um, until once again through fortuitous networking, which I feel like is crazy how many times this happens. Someone, I think I was at a party and one of my friends was like, "Oh, I have a job that might actually be perfect for you," and it's a marketing artist like 2D role at a little studio called 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗀. And that interview went way better, and I felt much more confident in the role because it was a more like entry level 2D role. That's where I am now. Still been there for about 3 years now.
I, again, sort of stumbled into the industry with my first job. And so I think almost similarly, maybe for slightly different reasons, the second job was a lot scarier to get. I think in some ways it's like now you have stakes in the industry because you know sort of what you could do or what you want to do. And I'd resigned from my previous job because I was in way over my head. It was at a time when they would have one person be a designer and a producer, which I is an insane prospect. And I was particularly not well set up for it. So I kind of had a small breakdown and then decided I needed to do something else. But that led me to like, okay, I don't know where to go or what to do. So looking at the internet for all of the game jobs I could anywhere in the Northeast and applied to a bunch of them and for open design positions and there weren't that many and it was that thing of like I need a job and that was and some people were getting back to me, some weren't. And I think that first or I guess second experience was learning about how to make those decisions, like what is important to you and what is settling. And I remember distinctly, I had basically one lead, and it was some small place in Pennsylvania, and they let me drive out there and visit them, and they showed me a little bit of stuff, and I talked to them, and then I went to my sister's house, who was in DC, relatively nearby, and I called my mom, it's like 27, and was telling them about how it was and how the job looked and how it sounded pretty cool, and I was thinking it could be a neat place. And she was just sort of quiet for a bit. She said, "You don't sound excited about it." And I could not hear that from myself. Like I couldn't see in myself that I was like choosing it potentially because it was what was available and not necessarily a good fit. And fortunately, within a couple of weeks, I got another lead. Someone finally responded on my interview and ended up at Turbine, and I was there for 9 years. But yeah, just that process of learning, yeah, just learning what it's like to be on the job market, which somehow felt weirder the second time around, and learning how to make choices about where you wanted to be and what you wanted to do, and being patient and finding something and lucky.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think for so many of us, at least speaking for myself, um, the machinations of finding a job uh, tend to move fairly opaquely. So thank y'all for shedding some light on it. Um, so once you got your respective jobs, this is extending past your first dev job. What have you found to be the most challenging part of working in the games industry?
Think for me, it's pretty challenging. Like, you love working a creative job and you really enjoy what you're doing. If you get to, fulfill that creative role on a game dev team, like for me, like making characters and drawing concept art and like doing all sorts of stuff like that. It's a lot of fun and it's very like fulfilling to be doing that. But it's also just like it can be really exhausting sometimes. Like you finish work and you don't want to do anything else creative, It's like something about that creative work that can just drain a little bit sometimes. And so kind of finding ways to take care of myself and keep myself from feeling burnt out and stuff like that, I think is probably one of the more challenging parts of it. I mean, it's fulfilling and awesome and incredible to get to do like this creative art job, but it's definitely hard to find that balance sometimes. Um, yeah, just take care of yourself creatively that way.
I think it's really good advice. I think for me there were two maybe big challenges, and one, which I think is a function of the time and where I went, is just like lack of strong mentorship, like sort of coming up in an apprenticeship, and there were pieces of the job where I got very strong guidance from people. Um, and then there are other places where it felt like, I might be the most experienced designer in the room, and that is not a good sign because I'm not a very experienced designer. So I think finding over the years the right people who know more than me that I can learn from, and learning how to make the most of that was a thing that was important. And I think the other big thing, isn't the same thing as self-care, but it's, I think, similar, like knowing yourself, and sort of maybe it's the longer term of self-care, like therapy, and understanding what your sort of like internal psychological limitations or concerns are, like, having issues like imposter syndrome, or the fear of a blank page, which can be pretty paralyzing for some people, and I know it can be for me. And learning how to sort of develop healthy confidence in yourself, and learning how to just manage whatever your neuroses happen to be, um, is a really important thing. And it's something that can, if you don't do it, can sneak up on you in ways that can, it's just sort of like unnecessary ballast to drag around through life and your career. So I think having insight into that and finding tools or processes to help you do that work can make you stronger and more capable.
Yeah, I have to agree with everything that was just said, especially the mental health care and the creative aspect, which for me are pretty linked. And I noticed like a real challenge I had was my personal creative projects and illustration and stuff that I like to do really fell to the wayside. And it's like a really difficult prospect to find that time to make your personal work and make sure you're keeping up with skills, and also make sure you're keeping up to date with like new tools and methods for your personal work, but also your job. And like, especially if those things, don't perfectly overlap. Because in my spare time, I prefer more to draw than to do UI. And it's just like really tough to have anything in the tank at the end of the day to make even more creative decisions, especially when I was a lead, because I was making a really mind-numbing amount of creative decisions every day, and I felt at the end of the day that the last thing I possibly wanted to do was make another creative decision. Um, and I also think that's something that maybe doesn't get talked about a lot, but is super challenging, or has been for me in the games industry, is that in a lot of smaller or indie studios, there's like a real lack of HR support, benefits, insurance. Like, and I am someone with chronic illness, so I've kind of had to see the dark side of that for a long time. I'm lucky enough to have been at studios where, you know, there was no crunch and like work-life balance was prioritized and all that, but there was just a lack of resources to make sure that I felt, stable and safe and secure in both my job and my health and my personal life and all that. I think that's a big challenge that we should probably talk about more in the industry.
Thank you for sharing, you guys. This is sort of a two-part question. I think Cole and Chris will be able to answer one part, but Emma, you'll you'll have your own question in regards to this. How did your career change after getting into games? And for Emma, where do you see or want your career to go after having just entered?
So there was sort of an initial run leading into design by way of QA, which was kind of a cliche way to do it. And then, well, there was learning how to do that more. There was learning enough programming to be able to help pull my ideas through, to help with prototyping things, to help explore space, not just on paper and conversation, but with things. And that was a big one. I think I'm going through another shift right now in that the game experiences we're building use machine learning as a piece of them. And part of what machine learning is that there's a lot of indirection between the data you put in and the things you want out and what actually happens. So sort of helping to tune a process that's more probabilistic and less directly, like you don't think through all the formulas that make a thing happen. You just work with this almost organic beast to get things out of it. It's not sentient, but it is many moving pieces. So learning how to design in that space and how to iterate in that space is a new challenge. So I think those were some of the big changes. I think the sizes of the company going up and down, going from a point when a game could be made by basically one person in a bedroom in England and another person doing the art for them, to up to 300-person teams doing things, and now back down to a startup with about 10 people, like riding that arc up and down, and the ways of managing and coordinating small and large teams has been a big change for me.
I definitely agree with the changing studio sizes being like a huge determinator of like what's challenging at the moment. And, my studio went from, I think when I started there were like 25 people in what kind of resembled like a dark basement. And now, we have a new office. We have over 100 people at this point, I think. And I think being in games basically gave me a career. I don't think it really changed my career because I didn't have anything, when I got out of college. But I think the way it's changed within game dev has been interesting because when I first started out and in the small studio, I was much more of like a jack of all trades doing all kinds of 2D stuff and also doing UI. And now that I'm a little bit further in my career and we have more specialized roles because the studio is bigger, I'm like pretty solidly in UI like 99% of the time now. And that's been really cool because it's been fun to dig down and specialize more in something that, was not something I did in college. But it's also had its own challenges because sometimes it's hard not to feel like you're scrambling behind if you didn't have that as a background.
For me right now, like so my official title is 3D character artist, but I'm kind of hopping around and doing a lot of stuff. I'm doing like the character art. I've been helping out with some like 2D like UI elements and uh just kind of all sorts of stuff. So in the future, I would definitely love to continue doing this kind of thing and continue to focus on characters. I know we were just talking about how creatively exhausting, especially lead positions can be, Cole, but I think I do want to try out. I want to see what it's like to be an art lead, and I want to work that role eventually. You know.
There's a lot that's awesome about being an art lead, so don't let me deter you.
Oh yeah, no, you're good, you're good. But yeah, so I would love to do that eventually. And yeah, just kind of see where things go from there.
Rad. Thanks, folks. Yeah, really interesting. I'm gonna pass it back to another audience question. I'm especially intrigued about this one because I believe I know at least two out of our three panelists have experience, I think, doing both.
For those of you working in-house, how important is it to have team members be in the same space as you, or do you all work remotely?
We're fully remote. My first 3 jobs were entirely on site, and my 4th fire hose was on site and then switched to remote. Um, there are sacrifices made definitely to working remote, and you have to work a lot harder to create some of the serendipitous moments that are really valuable. Like I remember being able to turn to Chris Chung sitting the other way from me and aside from me and interrupt his shader work to ask him a design question, or us having a conversation, or go to a meeting room and just brainstorm stuff together, or see what someone's doing on a screen and be able to have a conversation about it. And that is largely lost working remotely. but you can have a lot more discipline about working on your own. You have intense flexibility over how and where, and to some degree when you work, and those are pretty amazing things. Um, so I like both, and right now I love the ability to work remotely.
Yeah, hard second on that. The ability to work remote has been like nothing short of life changing for me, especially as I struggled to get into the office every day because of my chronic illness stuff. Working remote has just really changed the game. Yeah, my first Harmonix job, I was in office fully, and I was in office at Demiurge, I think, for the first year. And then, we very abruptly had to pivot and become a remote team. And to kind of answer the core of this question, it is important to have team members be in the same space. And yes, there is stuff that is lost, like those serendipitous moments. And I used to sit right next to my art lead when I was first working at Demiurge and pepper him with incessant questions about 30 times a day. And I feel like the speed of learning and the flexibility of learning is like much faster and you're fully immersed in it. So there's a lot more that you absorb a lot quicker. And it's much easier to just like pop over to someone's desk and have like a full conversation about, something you're working on or something you want to collaborate on. So there is something lost, but it's absolutely doable. It's definitely doable to have the full team be remote. And in fact, we started working with outsourcers in different time zones, and we were all over the place while being fully remote, and we all made it work, and produced some pretty awesome work during that time. So I think it's totally possible.
Yeah, I'm remote right now with Hackjack, and have been the entire time. Um, and yeah, I can second all of like the really awesome positives of being remote. Like I can be around the house and take care of my dog, and I got to, pretty much like take care of her while she was a puppy up until now. And so it's been nice to have that flexibility and just to be able to work, kind of around like my own daily schedule and what's, because life happens, you got to do other stuff. And so it's been really great to have that flexibility. But yeah, it does stink sometimes to not have that like in-person experience. And I feel like, you can only like bond so much as a team when you're in that remote like Discord space. Um, we have our little like hangout voice chat that we'll spend time in together and just chat as we work kind of on our own things, which is nice. But yeah, I miss the brief mass digi experience I had of us all like kind of collaborating in person and looking over at, the other artist's screen to see what they're working on and just discussing things that way. But yeah, so positives and negatives about it, I think.
I had
It
a
was very
couple
nice
more
to be
things.
home.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, Emma.
Oh, all good. Sorry.
No. This is okay. No, I wanted to add a couple more things on it. One, uh, the filling some of that gap is some of it's just work and process and habit, like setting up weekly game time sessions or vocal hangout channels and things like creating culture around ways to meet and interact virtually and regularly, and someone taking pains to like nurture that stuff is a really important thing. We actually do, we also do, as part of our culture, as part of the money we're not spending on real estate, we do quarterly meetups somewhere in the country or around the world. We're a small enough group that isn't totally insane to do. So we get a little bit of face-to-face time and do some meetings and some fun. So we try to get some concentrated social interaction, which really helps. And then the one last thing I was going to say is there's an interesting wrinkle to a remote job, which I think is useful and definitely something that, as I have grown in this industry and spent more time in it, I think is not always thought about. It makes it more of a job when you're all sort of like sweating and grinding stuff out and staying late and hanging out. There's a very industry sort of like awkward blur between family, dysfunctional frat house, job, bad idea relationships, good idea relationships. It all sort of smashes together. And when you're young, it fills that post-collegiate hole or post-high school hole of a way to interact and live together. And the thing about remote is that there's a little more distance. And I think as you get older, particularly as you start having families or start just like living your life in sort of maybe a more rounded way, that distance is not the worst thing. Like it doesn't mean you don't make friends, but it also means that you have a little more capacity to think about what you're doing because you want to, versus you sort of like falling in with the culture of the company because you're just immersed in it, and it means you can sort of live a life without living your life anywhere else, and that can be potentially dangerous is the wrong word, but it can cause issues if you don't, it can make your life less balanced than it needs to be.
That's super true. That is so true.
Yeah.
Another really nice thing about being remote is not having to travel and move around for work and stuff. Like, Hackjack is based out in Boise, Idaho, and that would have been a tough, like, move across the country straight out of college thing for me. So I'm very, very thankful that yeah, I can still be, you know, like in my comfort zone over here in Massachusetts, all working.
Yeah, totally. I thank you all very much for your insight on that. I think definitely these past few years have made a lot of the industry more open to whether they like it or not, remote working. So it's yeah, really great to get this wide range of insight. So thank y'all. Um, Now here's a big one. What would you say to people who want to break into the games industry now?
Oof.
Portfolios. It's so important. Like, just uh bug people, who have like strong ones who have succeeded with them, and like just copy how they decide to format and like present themselves. Like, it really is important. I don't think it always gets stressed enough. Like at least for me in my experience, it didn't get stressed enough in school. But it's like that's the first impression you make on people when you're trying to get into the industry. So it's very important. I think that's the biggest thing I would say.
Yeah, I would agree with making sure you have a super robust portfolio, and it's kind of like your snazziest, shiniest work, and make sure it's curated too. You don't need to put the mistake I made when I was younger was putting literally everything in my portfolio because I was like, look at all this stuff I do. But now that I'm, hiring on a fairly regular basis, what I instantly look for is like the impact of the portfolio, the five coolest things in the portfolio, like a concise, easy to understand portfolio is like a really big deal and will definitely get your foot in the door. But I also want to say, like, just talk to like everyone, like go to the events. Now that, I mean, COVID is still with us, but it's a little bit better. Like, go to the digital events, go to the in-person events if you can, talk to people, socialize, find out what they do, especially if you're in like a games event or if you have friends in games. Like, if you're always talking to people, you're going to hear a lot more opportunities that don't get posted online that you can't find just by kind of searching in isolation. And I found that that's like a really, really great way to, you sometimes you can get a referral from that person, and that gives you a foot even further in the door. So make sure you're networking, even though I know it's harder in the age of COVID.
I think I'd second all of that. I'd also say consider don't getting into not getting into games in this respect. It's really, really hard, and there's a lot of people doing it, and there's a lot of places doing it that are struggling to make money doing it. And I think you'll face a lot of headwinds in that space, and maybe you would in any space, but as a creative and technical space, it can be very challenging. So I think one of the reasons to there are many reasons to get a portfolio together. One of them is to be able to demonstrate your work. Another one is sort of like everyone has 10 shitty games in them, so try to get some of them done before you get hired to make them to get paid for making them. And I think another is like verify to yourself that this is really what you want to do. That when you get in the thick of it, it is the type of satisfying and rewarding that you want to stick with, that will make you want to climb uphill and keep doing things. So yeah, get your portfolio, get your experience, and sort of take the measure of how it suits you, because it could be very challenging, and you want to make sure that it's worth it to you to fight that fight.
Now, to sort of flip the script here, what would you say to people who are looking to hire folks who want to break into the games industry?
Look for diverse perspectives. I'm really excited that over the past few years, that's become a huge part of the conversation, and I think people are getting more understanding of how to go about that, because it makes a healthier workplace and better games, and I think pays things forward in places that it's good to do that. I think focus on portfolio and the conversation around the portfolio versus credits is a massive fundamental thing. And don't hire jerks is a general goal, but I think that that's something like, I think in looking at people, and this is, I think then to flip it back around, as you're working on stuff, work on your soft skills, your social skills, learn how to be a good collaborator in your work, because that's a huge thing that people should be looking for, that they're hiring someone that maybe will be different than them in many ways, and that's a good thing, but that ultimately can share a certain amount of values and a certain amount of ability to work together to find creative solutions to things.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think, you can hire the best engineer on the East Coast, but if they're, a jerk, or they're not working well with people, or they're, harassing people or being terrible, like it doesn't matter how good they are. So I think it's really important to make sure that they're like going to bring something positive in their mentality, their energy, especially if they're new, like looking to break into the industry and they're young and they're just out of college. Like I care more about their willingness and excitement to be there and learn new things and be motivated and be interested in the work over, specific like benchmarks of expertise and, concepts that they may not even understand yet because they're not in the industry. I think a lot of it comes down to those soft skills that you were just talking about.
I just wanted to make sure we made it back to one of our audience questions, one of our fabulous audience questions. This is something that that I think Cole touched on a little bit briefly, but I want to make sure we give it its own question. Kyle Reese has got one. Kyle, you wanna speak words?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so Cole, you mentioned how important um, like networking is, and like sometimes catching a lucky break is awesome that comes out of that. Of course, also putting the work in. And Chris, you mentioned a lot of those soft skills that are great to show off to people. And now with all of these things being pushed online, which is still excellent, but it's more difficult to show off those soft skills and maybe talk with people about things that you're doing in like smaller face-to-face groups. So, how would you guys recommend going about networking in the way that everything is currently?
Well, that's a good question, because I think once you're in the interview, like all of the sort of Zoom conversations, like even you get an email from someone that's interested in a job, and you're starting to learn about their soft skills from how they talk about themselves. So there's many opportunities once you're through that to show what kind of person you are, for lack of better words. But networking in this world, that's a really interesting question, and I honestly am just going to defer to other people. I don't have any great insight.
Yeah, that's such a tough one right now because we're all still kind of figuring out what it looks like to job seek in the remote world, the pandemic world. I would say definitely make sure you're looking at all the local events near you, and I guess non-local, because if it's online, you could pretty much go to any of them, and making sure you're, making the effort to reach out and talk to people, even if it's a little bit more awkward or weird or formal online. Because you can definitely still have soft skills online, and I think that everyone is a little more forgiving because, Zoom is weird. There's weird lags in conversation between people. And I think there's a lot of people in the games industry, myself included, when I was first starting out, I was super shy, I was super anxious. Like, I probably could not have even done this panel. I would have totally freaked out. But it's like it doesn't matter as much, I think, online because you can have that level of kind of distance from it where if you're super shy about talking to a person or if you're like, oh god, like I don't want to approach that person that I see right there, that's way too scary, like you could shoot them a message on Discord or, be in a voice chat, something like that. I think staying approachable and staying interested in approaching others kind of holds true whether it's in the real world or the digital world, in my opinion.
That there's a great insight there. I think of it as like you might have a turn-based brain in a real-time world, and so for some people, the ability to communicate through mediated things like Slack groups or forums or message groups or emails is a big plus to showing who you are because yeah, in the moment, some of us just totally seize up and we're feeling the pressure of who we're talking to or the stakes of the conversation. And in some cases, the ability to use these forums to interact can really help, can really help you sort of think about how to talk about stuff and make sure you're really listening to people. And that can be a plus.
Yeah, I totally second like all of that about just participating in those online communities and staying in touch with people that way. Um, like definitely just stay in touch with people that you've met online or people from school that are also trying to get into the game industry or just anybody that you've networked in the past. Like just reaching out to people and keeping those connections definitely.
Kate, this seems like an appropriate time to plug our Boston Game Dev Slack channel.
Yes,
Indeed.
absolutely. Uh, we have
Kyle, are you a part of it?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
nice.
Yeah, there's conversations happening there all the time. And, people who are actively in the industry, people who are looking to break in, and I find it to be a really just accessible and easy way to get started talking to people that I normally wouldn't interface with right now.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you are looking for a link to join the Boston Game Dev Slack, you can head on over to bostonpostmortem.org. I think they're on like most pages. So, yeah, absolutely. Check out the Boston Game Dev Slack. There's also a Boston Game Dev Discord server that we have a link to in welcome and info. Um, yeah, two good options. But yeah, thanks so much. I do also want to hop onto another audience question actually, because I know people mentioned school at one point, and I am very curious about the topic of game dev school because I know Emma went to it, but for Chris, didn't even exist at the time. So I got a question from Kevin. Kevin, would you like to say some words?
Hello. I do apologize if some of this is a little redundant, but I am a software engineer starting a master's in game science and design at Northeastern this fall. I was wondering if you guys had any advice specifically for students, things I should look out for. I know school doesn't always teach things the same way industry experience does.
I taught in that program, so I feel like I should have an opinion about it or I should keep my mouth shut. I'm not sure
Oh,
which way to
wow.
go.
Okay.
Yeah, I taught the intro games course to game design in that group for about 5, 6 years. Um, I think I think you're right. Like you'll definitely learn things in that program, and or in any game dev program, and some of them are more focused on the academic side of things. Some of them are focused on analytics. Some of them are focused on making games. I think the best thing you can do is look at what the courses actually have you doing and how that lines up with what you see yourself doing in the future. Um, for me, it comes down pretty simply to portfolio, like a program that I can come out the other side of, showing that I've done some stuff and learned some things directly in the process of making games would be really good signal that this person can make games. If you want to be a user researcher in games and you're going to a place that involves doing deep analytics on things and using science, using the science of that, which I know is a big part of the GSND program, that's also a good fit. But I think you do sort of want to take a step back, look at the curriculum, the program overall, and try to think about what am I going to get at the end of these courses and how does that position me to sort of plead my case to employers about what you can bring to them.
All right, thank you. That's great to hear. I'm definitely more focused on moving into the industry, but I think part of the reason I like Northeastern is because they do a lot of interesting things. So that makes things a little more open to me in terms of exploring my options and figuring out what I really like to do.
Cool. Yeah, I think then take that step, talk with your advisors, see if you're going, like, make sure you're on a track that it feels like you're getting the things that will help you go to that position.
Do we have any other game school opinions from game school alumnus 𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 or 𝗙𝗵𝗿𝗀, who I have no idea what your status is on game schools?
Yeah, I feel like a lot of us that went to game schools and are now in the industry have a very complicated relationship with game schools. Um, it's on one hand the programs like at WPI. I mean, I got so much out of it, especially just from working with the people I got to work with, and the faculty are amazing. Um, but it seems like there are schools that kind of miss certain subjects, and I think programs that like will miss other ones. Um, there's definitely like a fundamental like contradiction almost with how game industry works and how school works, right? School, you show up and you do your like assignments, and you turn it in and you get a grade, and then you pass the class and you succeed and you're like, nice, I'm done. um and I feel like that structure doesn't always um like totally prepare students going through it for the game industry, the way that maybe like an internship might, or something where you're really like getting that hands-on experience with game development. Like I think the programs don't always make it clear to students how like above and beyond the program itself they usually have to go to get that experience. There's like that lack of like communication there. Like that it's difficult to just kind of go through these classes and pass them and succeed in the classes, and then like do the same in the industry. Like there's just like so much more to the game development process than what you'll learn in like a 3D sculpting class. So I think it's like recognizing that, and kind of you have to do a lot of searching with like peers and working on projects with peers, and um, networking, interacting with people in the industry to really like get that understanding that you need um, to kind of move forward and break into the industry after college.
All right, awesome. Thank you. I will say, as someone who has a couple years of industry experience in software engineering, I can definitely relate to some of the things you're talking about in terms of like industry versus education and stuff.
All right, thank you guys. Thank you for taking the audience question. This is a bit of a reflective one, and I'm interested to see and to hear, what your thoughts are on this one. But how do you anticipate the path towards breaking into the games industry will change in the future?
That is a spicy question. Um, Actually, talking about game dev schools, I think that more specialized game dev schools and like an overall more saturated industry are going to make the space like increasingly more. So I do think it's tougher over the years. Like I hate this because I just realized I started college 10 years ago, but when I was, getting into college, like game dev schools like did not exist. Like I looked, it was just like it was very that's a very new field in my opinion in the last like 10 years or so. And I think that I've noticed that when I'm hiring or interviewing applicants who have gone to specifically game dev schools, like if it's like an accredited program at like a university, like it tends to give them a leg up and it tends to like specialize them early, which is I think a double-edged sword. It's not necessarily good to specialize early if you're not totally sure what you want to do. But I do think that it's going to make for a much more competitive market. But I also think that there's a good side to that, which is that I think people will accept less like shitty stuff at game studios where like, there's that kind of, I don't know, trend of like, crunching or like having crappy benefits or like, you know, the being kind of tied to the studio and now there's remote work and now there's like a lot more awareness of like all these things. So I think there's a lot to look forward to, but I do think it's gonna become a little bit tougher next few years.
I think I have no idea, but I think that there'll be changes that I could see coming are new platforms, like anything related to augmented reality. Heaven forfend the metaverse becomes a more of a real thing instead of a pipe dream slash scam. If digital economies akin to crypto become a real thing, those will change the nature of games, maybe more from a design perspective than anything. I think the sort of machine learning enhanced tools that are coming out, like the idea that there may be some things now that are really hard specialized tasks that people get really good at, like things related to technical art or rendering realistic characters or environmental art, that may turn into a weird mix of turnkey solutions and smart curation. It may be that skills that people have learned to be really good at no longer matter. An entirely new set of skills matter. And those will become really interesting challenges. I feel like I had some other third thought, but yeah, I think how you make them, who you make them for, where you make them on, that's all gonna change. Whether how you make money, if you can make money on them, is all gonna change, and it will just keep changing. It keeps changing. People that I in a design group that I've been in for like about 20 years now, watching them start as part of that sort of bedroom coder group of people or people working on Atari 2600 games that like all one after the other went into massively multiplayer games and then free to play games and then virtual reality and then all of these metaverse plays, like seeing everyone sort of like learn, sort of try to figure out how to fit into ride the next wave. Those waves will never stop.
And I have no idea how things are gonna change. I haven't really been in the industry myself like long enough to recognize any trends and things like that, but I second being hopeful about like, the like game programs becoming more popular, getting better. Like I think it's gonna be really cool to see how that changes things. More and more students coming out of college, um, like just hitting the ground running with like game degrees and game dev degrees, and hopefully more like 3D sculpting and 3D modeling degrees. That'd be cool to see soon. Um, but yeah, so I don't know, but I'm optimistic. I think it's gonna be really awesome in the future. Like, indie games are getting bigger and bigger, and more like experimental games are getting more attention, and so I think it's gonna be cool. I think there's gonna be a lot out there and a lot of opportunities out there, hopefully.
I I think that optimism. I think that though that perspective. It makes a lot of sense and is really good. And you're talking reminded me of the one other thing I was going to mention, which is unionization seems like it may actually happen, and that could transform a lot about how this industry works in any number of ways in terms of how we feel supported and safe. Also, potentially to what degree we shift from being these sort of like tribes that permanently affixed to studios, and maybe more of us become more like craft laborers in movies, that we just move from gig to gig and that becomes our life. So seeing if these benefits come to us and add security, and if they change the nature of how these groups, how studios form, and who is sort of permanent staff and who is more creative experts that roam in like from project to project, is something that I'm curious to see in the future.
Rad. Future. Thanks y'all so much. Probably gonna start winding down soon. Um, but we do have another audience question from Vadim Mayorsky. Vadim, would you like to say some words, speaking on the topic of indie games growing more popular?
Yeah, sure. So before I get into my question, I just want to say that I did graduate with a game design degree from Fitchburg State last year, and ever since then I have been working on indie games in my free time, well, personal indie games actually. And if that's necessary, I was wondering that is it possible to get into the gaming industry just from designing personal indie games in my free time? Depending on if any of you has designed indie games in your free time, and if it could help you work your way up and getting into the gaming industry, and well, depending on how many games you can design in your free time.
I think it's awesome to be doing that sort of stuff and designing these games in your free time. I think it's super important that they get out there and into the hands of other people. Just like uh, I think employers and studios really want to see that you've like made something and put it out there to a community and give them a chance to play it and take took their feedback. And I think that whole like interaction with the user base is like a very important experience that um, studios will likely want to see. Um, but yeah, I think it's awesome that you're doing that. I think that's definitely a big thing.
Yeah, I think I didn't use indie games to get a job, but I did use it to sort of grow and temper my experience. I went on like a 5-6 year run of doing game jams as an opportunity to push out of just the design jobs I'd sort of fallen into at studios, like recognizing I wanted to be more well-rounded, both within the design discipline and within actually making stuff. And this game I've done with my son called Loose Nozzles has been this long-running, slow simmer indie project on the side, and it's for me it's been more about almost what I'll call internal credibility, knowing that I've been able to tackle a bunch of things that before I started I wouldn't have known. Like I haven't had much level design experience. My programming was much less skilled. Pushing art through it, I even composed a bunch of songs. Like it was all useful for me to feel like I could then more with a straight face take on new challenges in other domains. I think in terms of entering the job, that stuff is super valuable. I think as someone as 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗀 was saying in the speaker questions, it's super important and high. They knowing, doing the work and being able to talk to it is really important. Like it's not just look at my portfolio, isn't that cool? Because we're going to look at it and be like, okay, but what did you do? Or, okay, that looks good, but what did you learn? Or more likely, that doesn't look great, but what did you learn doing it? So it's really the conversation about the work, which allows you to sort of show a little more of your insides, show a little more of your insights. And I think that it's how you grow from doing those things and how you speak to them that is super valuable. And I definitely can get you a job.
Yeah, I mean, I have been designing games in my free time, or either have some ideas for games in my free time. Some of them I have worked on. One of them is a prototype, and a couple of them I'm working on it or will work on it eventually. So yeah.
I think the most important things are finishing something, even if it's small. So I think having an idea doesn't really enter the conversation when you're looking for a job, even regardless of, that's not disparaging the quality of ideas. Starting something is better. Finishing something, even if it's a small thing but complete, is crucial. So taking something to completion doesn't mean selling it even, but like I showed it to people, I learned these things, I polished it, it was good, I moved on. Or I took it this far, I realized that fundamentally this was a problem and it wasn't going to be worth it to solve it. So I abandoned the project and moved on to something else. Like getting to a finish line and having a really good narrative about that path you went on and where you ended up is the most important thing.
Well, thank y'all so much. I've got one more question, and it's the most crucial one of all.
Oh shit.
Where can y'all find you and your stuff online? If you have anything you'd like to plug while we have you on this platform.
I am on Twitter at @LowryDraws. I'll post probably some fun art sometimes and updates on Pigeon Sim and all those shenanigans. So yeah, feel
If
free
you
to.
want to see a really buff pigeon, that is the place to go.
That's you get all the really ripped pigeons. Yeah, you have to go there for that.
Instantly sold on that one. I just dropped my portfolio link. It's could use some updating, but that's got probably my most recent, like, biggest body of work in there. And I also do the flyers for a local music night called 𝗖𝗵𝗿𝗶𝘀 Boston, which I can also link in the chat.
Oh yeah, I
Sick
can
nasty.
also link my very outdated portfolio. I don't think I've touched it in a year since I started working at HackJack, so
Let's normalize not updating our portfolio sometimes.
God, and how I feel the same.
Everyone, don't take that advice. Update your portfolio all the time. Don't do what we're doing.
Everybody's working on it, you know? It's a work in progress.
That's so true.
I just posted my to presenter info, my personal site, which was when I went on my last job run, like make myself look fancy with all the stuff I've done. And then a site for the indie game Loose Nozzles I'm doing with my son. And then the site for Hidden Door, the studio where I'm the game director on their new title. So all the things.
Woohoo!
Thank you so much, you guys.
Thank y'all
Yeah,
so
if any-
much.
Thank you so much for hosting this and inviting me. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.
This
Yeah,
was
this
a
was
lot of
great
fun.
time.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for being on the panel, everybody. It's a really, really great.
Yeah, this
Yeah,
was great.
thank you.
guys.
I learned so much from you two. It's awesome.
Woo.
Woo.